Welcome to today's webcast presented by Northwestern Mutual. I'm Betsy Hoylman. Today we'll be talking about how to protect yourself from one of the most significant risks to your income and plans for retirement. I'm joined by Steve Sperka, Northwestern Mutual Vice President of Disability and Long-Term Care, and Meryl, co-founder of Women Against Alzheimer's. Meryl is also the author of Slow Dancing with a Stranger, in which she offers an unvarnished account of providing 20 years of care for her husband who suffers from Alzheimer's. Welcome to you both.
Thank you, Betsy.
Well, before we get started, I'd like to pose a question to the audience. When you think about your goals for retirement, what do you consider the greatest risks to your ability to achieve your goals? Being able to save enough. Saving for retirement while trying to fund other goals, such as saving for college or paying off a mortgage. The ups and downs of the market. Stepping in to support parents or adult children. Falling victim to accident or illness, or taking care of a loved one who is chronically ill. Select as many as you like. And while our audience is answering the question, Steve, let's talk a little bit about those risks.
Sure, Betsy. You know, each of those risks is a very important consideration when putting together your retirement plan. But one of the most important ones to address is the long-term care risk, because that is the one that can have the most significant financial consequence, but as well as very significant physical and emotional consequences. And what we find is it's often the risk that people, one, aren't willing or comfortable talking about, or two, they believe that in the event that something occurs, there's going to be other sources to pay for it, like Medicare or Medicaid. And in many situations, that's simply not the case.
Or when you're young and healthy, the risk of needing long-term care isn't on the radar screen, which unfortunately, Meryl, was the case for you.
No one thought about the need for long-term care at that point. You still had that golden dream. You saved, you had a portfolio. We were two adults in our prime, both had jobs, good jobs, focused on our work. And then you get blindsided by a diagnosis. And there's no way to plan for that unless you've thought ahead. And that's why I say think ahead.
Prior to your husband Harvey's diagnosis, did you and he ever talk about long-term care and how you might deal with a situation if one of you needed long-term care?
I had taken care of things. I had my insurance. I had disability. We had the conversation, and he said, "You work so hard. Let me just take care of you." And I thought, isn't that nice? And I should have learned. I should have taken care of it.
That part of your story is not uncommon at all. In fact, we surveyed adults across the U.S. last year and found that 2 in 5 are either unsure of how they'll handle long-term care or do not plan to address their potential long-term care needs. And yet at the same time, it's increasingly becoming an important issue.
And Betsy, one of the reasons it's becoming an increasingly important issue is the impact that longevity is having on all of us. Through medical advances and science, we're able to live much longer lives than our parents. But at the same time, that creates a situation where we need to think about what does that mean in terms of providing care for ourselves, how are we going to do that as we live a long life.
And when we need that care, doesn't the caregiving often fall to the children and the loved ones?
No one wants to be a burden to their kids. I mean, you don't see yourself that way. But, today the average caregiver is 49 years old, taking care of her kids, and then all of a sudden little things happen with their parents, one parent or both parents, and then it just begins to mushroom.
We were talking about the concept of the sandwich generation. It's people that fall into the situation where they have to care for their kids as well as an aging parent. And the interesting thing is the size of that population. Individuals between ages 40 and 60 that fall into that situation, it's 20 million people. And 1 in 8 of those people are actually, paying for care for their parents as well as the challenges of raising children. It's a large population of people.
Based on your experiences, I know you'll both have valuable insights to share during our webcast today. Our goal is to help those of you in the audience accomplish 3 things. Number 1, learn the facts about long-term care. Number 2, understand the risk that a long-term care event can have on your retirement income, whether you're the person receiving care or the person providing care. And number 3, how you can take steps to minimize that risk, including tips for talking with your loved ones about long-term care. So, all right, facts first. What is the likelihood that any one of us will be impacted by a long-term care event? Steve?
So if you're 65 years old today, the statistics from the Department of Health and Human Services will say that there's a 70% chance that over the course of your lifetime you'll need some form of long-term care.
Let me add the other aspect for the reality check. Men, 50% chance they'll live to 87, women to 90. Fastest growing demographic in this country is 85 plus. Now, at 85 plus, 1 out of 2 ends up with a memory issue or Alzheimer's. So that's long-term chronic automatically. It is overwhelming right now, and this is the part we have to pay attention to. This is where it all kicks in. But no one has begun to really think about that, and we need plans in place.
And even if I don't need long-term care services myself, what's the likelihood that I'll be impacted as a caregiver? What are the stats on that?
AARP did a study and found that over the past 5 years, 42% of American workers have had to take time off of work to care for a family member. And that number is expected to grow over the next several years. And for people who haven't laid out a plan and get in that situation, they don't have a lot of good options available to them.
And 90% of care in this country is unpaid care of people like us taking care of our loved ones. That's what we do. All right, well, that's fine. Well, we were a 2-income family. My husband's out of work. I try to take care of him, get him to the doctor's diagnosis. Tricky time. He's being difficult, trying to hold a job. Then I cut back part-time. I run through everything in terms of vacation, family leave. I max out. And then I'm forced to leave my job. 2 adults out of work in their prime. And within the first year, $100,000 in out-of-pocket expenses. Now, you want to talk frightening? That's frightening. For anyone. Nobody has that kind of money.
So that brings us to the question of cost. And I'll pose another question to the audience. Say someone you love needed long-term care services and you really wanted them to be provided in the home, as opposed to in an assisted living facility or a nursing home. How much do you think you'd need to pay a month for a home health aide for 8 hours a day? $1,500 a month, $3,500 a month, or $5,500 a month? While our audience is answering that question, Steve, what do we know about the cost of care?
Here at Northwestern Mutual, we've developed a cost calculator. And what you can do with that cost calculator is really use it to understand the cost based on where you live in the country, because there's a lot of variation regionally. And it's an important step to really make sure you understand in your situation where you live and how you might like to think about your care, what those costs are. But getting back to our poll question, the average cost of home health care for 8 hours of care is $5,500 a month, which translate that would be about $66,000 a year.
And consider that that's just 8 hours a day. And what happens, it may start that way, but at a certain point with long-term chronic disease, there's the physicality of care. It's going to stretch to 24/7. I still, after 20 years, do a 12-hour shift. I am trying to slow the bleed because we will be bankrupt too. I mean, as soon as I began to see the numbers, Betsy, I ran out and put a long-term plan in place for myself. I said, I'm going to be bankrupt. And every decision I made was, will we make it? Will we survive this?
Yeah. So Meryl's plan, and what she's talking about home care and the challenge of providing 24 home care. So getting back to some other options that are available, assisted living is an option, and the average annual cost of assisted living is about $50,000 a year. Nursing home can be double that. And, a real important consideration for people as they're putting together this plan is those are the costs today. And for your sandwich generation individual, they need to think about what do those costs look like in 20 or 30 years. And, those numbers can be well into 6 figures as you think about inflation and how those costs are going to change over time.
And no matter where that care is provided, long-term care expenses are not likely to be covered by Medicare, Medicaid, or health insurance.
It's one of the things that we've found in our research that people really misunderstand. Our recent poll has found that 43% of adults believe that long-term care expenses are paid by either Medicare, Medicaid, or their health insurance, and that's simply not the case.
Let me just add in that on Medicaid, and people don't understand this, to be qualified for Medicaid, I think you can have $2,500 to your name. A house is an asset on the side.
It's not the life that anyone would want.
It's not the life you want, and it's a safety net for people who really need it. But more and more families are going bankrupt and ending up in Medicaid because of this long-term care situation.
What's often forgotten about is if I need to drop out of the workforce for a period of time to care for a family member, I'm not going to be funding my retirement for a period of time, and that can have a significant consequence down the road on your own plan.
Like Social Security at the end. When you're in the middle of the crisis, you're not thinking, what's going to happen to me? I used to think, well, if I get sick, what's going to happen to my husband? I never thought about, well, what's going to happen to me when it's all over? What am I going to have left? I've got to think about living another 20 years. Where were you when I needed you, Steve?
So we're talking a lot about a plan and what's your retirement plan, and it's probably important because many of us and many watching the show right now are saving for retirement. They're diligently saving, and you say this question: what is a plan? Well, one of the things up on the screen right now is an example of what a plan might look like. When you sit down with a financial advisor, what they can do for you is they can take your savings and they can put it together, and they can help you understand, as you live through retirement and as you live out your dreams, here's how the portfolio and here's how your income might look. And the left-hand side of this graph shows just an example of a couple that's done a diligent job saving retirement. And I think in the example here, it's $4 million of assets, and you can see how it goes over time. And that's an example of a financial plan and what an investment advisor can do for you. What does that plan look like in the event of a long-term care event? And what you can see in the graph, the picture on the right, shows the consequences of the plan in the event you have long-term care expenses. And this example has a couple that save $4 million. And for many people, that's a huge amount of money. But you can see over a pretty short period of time, in the event of a long-term care event, that those assets can deplete very quickly. So it's important for people to understand the consequence of their plan for long-term care. And then in talking with a financial professional, they can talk about, well, what are some steps I can take to mediate that and give me some options.
As a result of your experience, Meryl, I know you plan for your long-term care needs, but you write in your book, Slow Dancing with a Stranger, our adult sons and daughters deserve better options and not the bankrupting burden of our care. What were you thinking when you wrote that?
I don't think it's just my thinking. I think you always want something better for your kids. You're always very proud and independent. And these diseases they're already burdening the next generation.
And on top of those financial demands, there are also the physical and the emotional demands of being the caregiver.
You're last on the totem pole with everything. And the physicality of care, you don't take care of yourself. 40 to 70% of caregivers are clinically depressed, but we don't know it because we don't have time to focus on it. So you're ending up with 2 patients, and that's going to end up on your kids. There's just no way around it. We're not prepared for any of this. So the caregiver burden is big, and we don't talk about it because we're stoic. Men like to fix things. Women learn to live in diseases. But trust me, the hardest thing for a man to do is bathe and toilet his mother. That image alone, that's why my plan, having a plan in place for me, when I walk and visit my kids, in the back of my mind, I know that I'm covered.
Meryl, you talk about the physical and emotional challenges of a caregiver. And one of the things that people often don't think about is when you're in that situation of maybe having to drop out of the workforce to be a caregiver, that has financial implications to not only your retirement plan, but your health insurance. And, if you're in that situation with those physical needs, you may have more health challenges in a situation where you don't have the resources they had previously. So that the challenge of a caregiver is very, very significant and leads to the importance of planning around that.
So as a practical matter, let's talk about what people can do to better prepare themselves and their family for the potential of a long-term care event.
One of the things we advise to start is start with a conversation, and the conversation with the family. Talk with your spouse. Talk with your children, talk with your parents. And it's so important for the sandwich generation, who really has the 3 generations that they need to think about in the plan. Because recognize, if you don't have a conversation, and when the crisis happens, the default plan is the children. So it's important to incorporate them into that discussion.
It's an anxiety-filled topic. In fact, in our 2014 Planning and Progress survey, 35% of participants said talking about long-term care needs with their parents would be difficult, right up there with asking to borrow money or asking their boss for a pay raise.
You're right, Betsy. It is a challenging conversation, but there are some resources out there that can make the conversation a little easier. Have the conversations, if you can, when everyone is healthy, so it's not at the crisis situation, or quite frankly, your options are going to be limited.
You said plural, conversations. It's
Yes.
not one conversation.
Yes, that's the other piece, is don't expect that this is going to be a 30-minute conversation with mom and dad, because there's emotions, there's a lot of things to think through. So recognize it's going to be conversations. And the other thing is, test the waters, Use some probing questions to see if they're open to it, and just kind of ease your way into that conversation.
It's often easier when you can talk about a relative or a neighbor, and you can bring that up and have them contribute their thoughts of what they would want in that situation.
Yeah, and you can also get a sense of, their willingness to talk about it at that time. And just be a good listener. This is a very challenging topic for mom and dad to get into. And don't push to help them make decisions right away. Assume this is going to be a discussion over time, and let them, have the time to think about their emotions and wishes, and let them bring it forward as they get comfortable.
So once we've had that conversation within the family, what's the next step?
So a critical next step after that conversation is to sit down with a financial advisor to really help you understand, number one, what your plan looks like, and 2, the consequences of that plan. In addition to that, there's probably some important documents that advisor can help you with, wills, powers of attorney, but it's important to have that conversation.
May I just chime in? It is so critical to have, a durable power of attorney, all these documents in place, and you really forget about them, or you don't check up and see if they're current. I mean, if I, in fact, had been smart enough and done some of that type of planning, that would have made the difference for me. But again, all my documents are in a box. I'm almost embarrassed. I mean, when you are in the middle of a crisis, it's almost too late, because then it's overwhelming. It's one more thing to get together. You would have received a box from me. Would you have taken a box?
Yeah. Well, oftentimes that's what your advisor gets. It is a box, and my advice on that is many people they're almost crippled by the concern of I've got this over here and these assets over here. A good advisor can, number one, bring all those assets together, and you should expect that of your advisor, to bring them together and help you understand the big plan. And show you the assets. And the critical piece in this is they can show you your retirement plan and how your assets will go, but you need to make sure that they're going to show you what is the impact of that plan in the event of a long-term care event, and have a conversation about what are my options in terms of managing that event over the long term.
When I listen to Steve, what I hear is he is the neutral party. So that conversation with my husband that got shut down, you could have started it up again. Just the way I had a doctor take away my husband's driving privileges at 56. I couldn't have done that. But you're that neutral party, because you have everybody's best interest.
And recognize the benefit of having an advisor involved is if you do get in a situation where either you're both in a situation where you need care, or one is providing a lot of care for the other, having someone to help you on the financial aspects of the rest of your life is very important.
At a certain age, what's important? Your health and independence. And financially, that's important to you. And most of us don't make it unless we've planned ahead.
This has been such a fascinating and helpful conversation. Do you each want to offer some final thoughts?
Sure. I would just start by saying as you think about your retirement, You know, the challenge that people face today for the sandwich generation is not just making it to retirement, but it's making it through retirement. And as you think about all of the consequences and the challenge that could come up, make sure the long-term care element of that is a piece of it, because as we talked about today, it's becoming a growing concern and risk that we're all going to face.
You know, Betsy, the only reason I wrote the book is I really tried to forget so I could live forward, was I didn't want the next generation stuck. I wanted an honest conversation about what was going on. And the idea that, you know, it's always too soon before it's too late, got to remember that. Anticipate, and don't make assumptions, because the assumptions of 20 years ago are no longer operable today. So I want the next generation to have it better and more options. I like more options.
Very valuable advice from both of you, and thank you so much, Meryl, Steve, for your time today. And to those of you in the audience, I hope we've inspired you to have a conversation with your loved ones about long-term care. Having a plan in place will help to preserve what you're working so hard to accomplish, saving for and living comfortably in retirement. Now let's transition into the live question and answer session with Steve.
Welcome, everyone, to the live portion of our program with Steve Sperka. Let's get right to your questions. Our first question comes from Ken, and the question is, when you say 70% will need LTC sometime in their life, can you break that down as to the length of the care? Seems to me that the length has a great effect on cost. Steve, can you address that?
Ken, that's a great question. And going back to the same source that we used for the 70% statistic, what the Department of Health average length of care, what they say the average is 3 years. However, up to 20% may need care for more than 5 years.
Okay, great. Our next question comes from Sarah, and it's about competing priorities, which I'm sure a lot of people will be thinking about now that they've heard the webcast. What is more important, saving for retirement, planning for long-term care, or paying for my child's college education? Steve, I'm sure you get that question a lot.
This is a great question, and it's really relevant for many people in the sandwich generation, which we just talked about. And the answer is, there's not a right answer for every person, because everyone has different goals, different dreams, and different values about what's most important to them. But important consideration that we talk about with people is recognize if you decide not to fund your retirement and fund something else in exchange for your child's education, the risk of not funding that, what's the risk of not funding that retirement and the potential that you run out of money? You may become, your children may be your only source for retirement income. So in terms of thinking about the priority, we always want to point people out that funding that retirement can be very important, because oftentimes with college funding, your children may have other options down the road. So some key things to keep in mind.
But there are ways for people to manage all of those priorities at the same time, presumably, if the planning is there.
And you are exactly right. And the key to that is get started early and talk with someone, a planner that can help you prioritize what's important to you and chart a path for success down the road.
All right. Let's move to our next question, which comes from Matt. And Matt's question is, the guest talked about having a number of documents in place. Let's talk a little bit more about what those are and which ones are key.
That is a great question, and one that we come across when we're trying to help people here at Northwestern in their planning. We say there's 3 key documents, and those being a durable power of attorney for your finances and for your health care, and a will. Now, I mentioned a durable power of attorney. It's an important distinction. In the case you or someone you know becomes mentally incapacitated, you need what are called durable powers of attorney for medical care and finances. So durable power of attorney means that the documents stay in effect even if you're incapacitated. And those are really important. To make sure you've got what you need, we recommend you talk with an estate planning attorney who can really identify what's important. And you may have those documents in place today, and maybe you got them in place years ago. It's never a bad idea to have another look at them to make sure they're updated for what's going on in today's world.
Okay, so you really want to have those anyway, regardless of your long-term care planning, but certainly they need to be a component of a plan.
You're exactly right.
Okay. Our next question comes from Tom, and Tom asks, this is interesting, what would I have to pay for long-term care if I paid for it myself? How much would I have to have?
Tom, that is a great question, and the challenge of that question is it really depends on the circumstances of what happens down the road. Key things to consider are where might you need care, how long might that care last. We talked about 3 years as an average, but 20% lasts longer than 5 years. And the other consideration is what other sources of income are you going to need in retirement? Do you have a spouse that's going to need care as well? So it really is there's not a single answer to that question. It really depends on your circumstances, which is why it's important to think about all of that as you start to develop your plan.
Okay. And our last question comes from Amanda, and Amanda's question is, what is the best age to begin planning for long-term care? I'm in my 30s. Is that too young?
Amanda, there's not a right answer to your question, and everyone's circumstance is different. Now, typically when people think about long-term care planning, it's often thought of as a pre-retirement vehicle for people as they get a little older. However, everyone has different values, and everyone has different things that are important to them. So for some people, it's appropriate to start thinking about it in their early 30s or 20s. My advice to you all, however, is think about all of your financial priorities at this stage of your life. Long-term care may or may not be really important to you right now, but you may have other things that are also important that need to be addressed. And talking with a financial planner can help you prioritize that and figure out what's right for your specific situation. But I always say with long-term care planning, there's never a right or wrong answer. It really depends on your particular circumstance.
Well, I suppose at some point over the course of your life, those priorities are going to change a little bit. And as you get closer to retirement or as you get older, then long-term care plan becomes a greater priority.
You're exactly right. Exactly right.
All right. Steve, thank you so much for your time today. And thanks to all of you who joined us today. Just as a reminder, we'll be sending follow-up information to you via email along with a link to this presentation if you'd like to watch it again or share it with someone. We hope you found today's webcast valuable, and of course, if you have any follow-up questions, we hope you'll speak with your financial professional. If you don't currently have someone helping you with your financial planning needs, we invite you to visit northwesternmutual.com to find a representative in your area. For all of us here at Northwestern Mutual, have a great day.